Hello and welcome to a Monday Night Football Showdown breakdown show. My name is Adam Levitan, joined by fellow Showdown virgins Cody Main and Drew Dinkmeyer here for a Derek Carr at Justin Herbert, a white-hot Derek Carr at a better than anyone expected in the history of the world, Justin Herbert. Cody, you're back from last week's technical difficulties. How's it going?
Back from the dead after Dink killed me off for the flag plant. So I'm feeling good.
I killed you, then I killed DJ Shark. It was a two birds, one stone situation.
Indeed. Drew, you're ramping up for NBA season. What's going on?
Yeah. I basically been in the NBA weeds with projections, getting a lot of news today on different like player injuries and different things. So I've been updating those seasonal projections and just trying to figure out, sifting through this showdown slate, who am I going to put the kibosh on tonight?
Whose career will Drew ruin tonight based on either their usage falling out of favor with the coaches or through devastating injury? I want to say before we get into it here, Drew mentioned NBA. If you are playing NBA fantasy, and I assume that hopefully a lot of you are, because it really is a great game. If you're playing season long, our draft kit is live right now. Features Gallagher's top 150 rankings for every format, rankings for best ball. I've been grinding the best ball streets a little bit in the NBA side. And then also coming soon, not up yet, will be our full-blown DFS in-season package in which Drew and the team will spend roughly 20 of 24 hours a day trying to get everything right for each NBA slate. It really is insane. It's like a NFL Sunday, except every single day of the year. You can imagine the undertaking that is. So check that out. Okay. Raiders, Chargers. I mean, this looks like a high-scoring game. We've seen Brandon Staley defenses like really do well at keeping teams in front of them, daring them to run. We saw it against the Chiefs. I think that's kind of a well-known narrative in the DFS circles now. But overall, Cody, from a macro perspective, how do you think about this game and how you're going to think about lineups tonight?
Yeah, and these projected high-scoring slates, especially where we think there is likely to be a lot of pass volume, as Thorman noted at the bottom of snaps and pace. I mean, this thing's going to be up in pace in theory, assuming both teams keep their pedal to the metal in the pass game. It's going to be really tough for these kind of dust balls in the sub 1K salary range to get there, just because we're going to see, or we think we'll see, so many projected fantasy points. So you have this kind of mid-tier range, starting with the kickers and up into that 5 and 6K range that I think are going to force their way into lineups, while I think most of the field is going to build in that 8K and above, and then find some of these really, really, really cheap guys to try and pick off and build lineups that way. So this is one of those slates where even if one of those guys lands in the end zone and has like a 1 for 6 and a touchdown type of game, they might not be enough to get there. So I think just from a macro sense, I think one way we can plan out our lineups today is just kind of building a more balanced approach with trying to pick off some of these mid-tier guys.
Yeah, we had some news come into the show, Drew, and we'll get to running backs in a second here, that Josh Jacobs is going to be active for this game. There was a question mark for a while. We saw Peyton Barber play really well last week. Looks like Josh Jacobs is going to be active, throwing yet another name into the mix here. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go. Generally speaking, how do you like to play these kind of slates where there's a lot of guys and a lot of expensive guys?
Yeah, I think it's, as Cody mentioned, usually you want to try to find kind of the more balanced builds, but it's a little bit difficult to do that on this slate. There's not that many options, and we're getting crowded out now at the Raiders running back position a little bit, because I assume they're going to have all three of those guys active still, right? Like, so
probably.
We're going to get, I don't think we're going to get a full workload from Josh Jacobs, which means we get some Peyton Barber. Does Josh Jacobs then eat into any of like Kenyon Drake's receiving role? Like, it gets very confusing. And so I think it's going to be an interesting slate. So I think you have to kind of go one of two routes. I think if you're playing mass multi-entry, at least from my perspective, you need to either kind of take a bigger position on one of the cheap guys, or I think you need to play like a totally different construction. And Cody alluded to the 5-1s in these games where the totals are, the spread's tight, the total's high. They get underutilized kind of by the field naturally. And that's kind of what I think. Like, I think the Raiders' start to the season is a little bit fluky. I don't think they're a bad team, but I just think they've run a little bit hot. And I think the Chargers are legit really good. And I also could see just the way Staley's defenses are designed kind of encouraging the Raiders to run the ball a lot, which takes away some of their reception volume and makes these Chargers 5-1s even more attractive. So that's kind of the lean that I'd be taking. I'd either be taking like a big push on one of these cheap guys and like taking a stand there, or I'd be going in the direction of trying to build a lot of 5-1s. For me, it would be more on the Charger side because I'm thinking they're the more legitimate contender of the two.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't believe that this line is only 3. I mean, the Raiders have won, are 3-0. They've won 2 overtime games. I mean, 2 crazy overtime games that they've won. Chargers have been very, very, very good. And I do think Brandon Staley is sharp. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the projections and projection models are using team totals top-down approach, and team totals top-down approach is going to give you a lot more Raiders type stuff. And I think that's what Drew and Cody are talking about, getting into more 5-1 or 4-2 if you think the Chargers are going to roll here and beat what the market thinks. Market thinks that they're only a 3-point favorite. At the quarterback position, we have Derek Carr playing. I mean, you could argue maybe the best ball of his career, but man, I mean, this is a tough spot for all quarterbacks. We saw them do a good job on Patrick Mahomes as well. Justin Herbert, very clean spot for Justin Herbert, who just is an absolute baller, just shoving it right down the throat of draft Twitter, who said he was a horrible pick. Cody, how are you thinking about the quarterbacks tonight? Can we captain them? What do you think about quarterback?
I mean, it's never a comfortable fade. And even last night, Tom Brady didn't end up in the optimal lineup going back to Foxborough. I don't think anyone would have projected that. He was owned 88% in total and over 20% in captain. These quarterbacks that are mostly pocket passers that don't offer a whole lot with their legs, it's really tough for them to get there when we have these high volume receivers that we can captain instead. So it's not going to feel good, but I think I'm going to end up underweight probably on Herbert, and same for Derek Carr and the captain. And if those guys just go out and spread the ball around and they put up an optimal score, then I'll just take it on the chin. But even in flex, I think you can kind of get away with these where you can get away fading them if you soak up a majority of the passing attempts, which you can with Mike Williams and with Keenan Allen and even Austin Eckler to a degree that are much cheaper. So I think that I'm taking the approach that I'm going to end up underweight both the quarterbacks and just hope to soak up the aerial attacks through the pass catchers as opposed to the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, that's always my default dink with these pocket passers is like, how bad can they really burn me? I'll have their pass catcher anyways. How bad can they burn me unless they run for one? And so we've seen Justin Herbert show a little bit of mobility, but that's kind of my default. I feel like that's maybe the field's default as well. I don't know. What do you think about using quarterbacks tonight in both flex and captain?
Yeah, it's just the field, especially in the big lottos, the field, so many people are using optimizers of some sort, and also quarterbacks are like the name values. So I think just the ownership and the field utilization is always going to be pretty hefty on these guys. And I'm always trying to take an approach at being underweight, especially on the captain side. But I think tonight, especially given this game environment, this pricing, I really, really think like a consideration for full fade on Derek Carr makes sense. Not only just from the captain, but even like if you really are taking stands in MME, I think that's one way to immediately start reducing duplicates and starting to get a little bit more unique with kind of higher ceiling type lineups. And that's a route I'd like instantly be pretty interested by. And basically all you're hoping there, because it is a pocket passer, you're just hoping that the Chargers defense plays well in the red zone. That's really all it comes down to, because we've seen you can go up and down the field, but if you can't score touchdowns, you're not getting into the captain spot at the quarterback position, and you might not even get into the flex spot in a high volume reception game.
Off topic here, but Chris says he's still upset Baker Mayfield couldn't hit Odell. This is a forward-thinking show, Chris, and we're not going to talk about that. Okay, the running back position got interesting because Josh Jacobs is going to play, and let me just pull up here what we have. We did this kind of on the fly. The news just happened. What do you think about our current Raiders running back projection, Cody? And what do you think the field is going to do now that they know Josh? Oh, this isn't even updated yet. It should come through in a minute here. But Josh Jacobs is going to be active for this game. What do you think the field does, and how did they handle the Raiders running backs?
Yeah, and I was still doing ownership updates on the fly, so there might be another update coming to kind of lessen the ownership projections on Barber and Kenny Drake even more. But it doesn't feel good, but it's probably one of the most attackable spots on the slate now that we've got Jacobs in, who projects probably between 10 and 15% ownership. Same thing for Barber, and Drake will be around that range too. Barber probably completely falls out of favor now, just with having Jacobs in unless Jacobs, is active only in emergency situations. But having Jacobs back now, I think, as we mentioned off the top, that this Brandon Staley defense wants to let teams run as long as they can stop the pass. And if Jacobs does move down the field with the Raiders offense and is able to punch 2 in, we see these type of mid-tier guys that just get just enough volume to kind of fit into the flex in certain lineups. So I don't have any problem doing that as a contrarian approach. And I know a lot of people will ask me in Discord if you're including these guys in your kind of one guy under 10% ownership. I think Jacobs is going to be pretty close to that. We'll see where it shakes out, but he might get around that 10% range. So if you're doing that type of rule tonight, Jacobs would certainly be somebody that is in consideration for me.
Yeah, I want to be clear that Kenyon Drake's role I don't think is affected very much by Josh Jacobs. In other words, Josh Jacobs and Peyton Barber have the same role, much like, on the Eagles, Boston Scott and Miles Sanders have the same role, where Kenny Gainwell and Kenyon Drake have a very, very specific role in games where the Raiders get behind by a lot, where they're trailing by a lot. That is Kenyon Drake's time to shine. Yes, it's insane. They paid him $11 million guaranteed to go out there on some pass downs, but that is the state of it. Andrew says, what is Josh Jacobs' injury? He was out with an ankle last week. It didn't sound good on Thursday, to be honest. Like, Gruden did not sound too optimistic on Thursday, but looks like he will be up. On the other side, I mean, the story is obviously Austin Eckler, who has added goal line work to his repertoire this year. I mean, Austin Eckler has a huge share of the goal line work. We know he has a huge share of the total team passing. They're going to give some carries, we hope at least, because we do have an unders bet on Austin Eckler carries tonight, 14.5. But we hope that they give Justin Jackson, Larry Roundtree some carries, but when they do, they are typically not in the high leverage situations, not around the goal line as much, between the 20s, not on pass downs, et cetera, et cetera. So Austin Eckler, I mean, always an Austin play. I always want to bet on Austin Eckler, especially in DraftKings format. Not quite as strong on FanDuel here, but still very strong. Eckler tonight, Dink, I don't really see how we can get away from him. How are you thinking about handling him versus the field?
Yeah, and this is one of those spots where, for me, like, if I can take a really strong position against Carr, then I can start to take a stronger position into Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and those types of things. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate one of Cody's points here as well when talking about Roundtree and Justin Jackson. He was talking about how in these games, when the high totals do live up to kind of the higher pass environments and whatnot, what tends to happen is these cheap plays tend to get squeezed out because there's not like them just doing a little bit isn't enough. And so these two guys in particular, like, their routes to doing something that's more than a little bit, if this is a really high scoring slate, is pretty thin. Because basically, like, we're talking their best case upside scenario is, I guess, like, Eckler gets hurt mid game or something like that, and then they play a bunch, or like maybe falling into a touchdown. But it's pretty thin to think that they would like rattle off a really big play. So, when I'm looking at like cheaper options, they're ones that I would push down my list, especially in lineups with Eckler, because I think the only way that they're really like hitting a ceiling that like challenges this slate, unless the slate is not as high scoring as we think, and then things get a little bit weirder, but is through kind of an in-game injury to Eckler.
Yeah. By the way, there's like a major Josh Jacobs hive out there. Like, if you say something bad about Josh Jacobs on Twitter, like, all these people like, Juan, Jacobs is going to eat. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know where these people are getting this from, that Josh Jacobs is some great player and was worth a first-round pick and everything. But anyways, we move on. Let's go to the wide receiver position. So we talked about how Brandon Staley tries to keep the ball in front of him. That's how they're playing defense. That is not good for the way that Henry Ruggs plays his game, certainly better for the way that Hunter Renfrow plays his game. I also want to note on the Raiders side, so much of Brian Edwards' production has come in overtime, and it's kind of random, when guys produce and when they don't. I'm not trying to say bad things about Brian Edwards. It's just kind of random. Like, he hasn't done much in regulation at all season. It's been like almost all in overtime, which is weird. On the other side, obviously, Mike Williams has turned into an absolute alpha, and we have Mike Williams for a higher projection than Keenan Allen tonight. I mean, I didn't think that would happen this year at all. But everything has come together for Mike Williams playing the X role in Joe Lombardi's offense. So a lot of options here. Cody, what do you think about the wide receiver position tonight?
Yeah, it gets really, really interesting at the top end. Obviously, we have Mike Williams, who is playing that Mike Thomas role in the Joe Lombardi offense, who has been a monster to start the season, and the usage finally looks legit. It doesn't seem like it's fluky at all. But then you have Eckler, who we just talked about, who's $600 cheaper. You've got Waller, who we'll talk about in a second, who's $1,000 cheaper, and then Keenan, who's $1,400 cheaper. So I think what you're going to find happen is a lot of these builds that prioritize one or two of these guys, maybe try and squeeze in three of them, are really going to go for that Eckler, Keenan, Waller group, and then Mike Williams might just get squeezed out because he's so expensive as people are playing Herbert and playing Carr a little bit too. So I think you might actually end up with a situation where, and don't get me wrong, he's not going to come in low owned by any means, but I think Mike Williams is likely to be the lowest owned of that group. And you'll probably even catch lower captain ownership on him too. So big fan of Mike Williams tonight. And then, yeah, I mean, the rest of these guys, Keenan, and then the other two guys that we talked about, or the other guy we talked about coming up with Waller at tight end. I mean, these guys are just such volume monsters that it's tough to find paths for them to completely fail. So this is just another reason why I'm getting on board with these skill position players over the quarterbacks.
Yeah, and Mike Williams, what Cody's referring to, is an example of pay up to be contrarian. On the other side, Dink, I mean, it's hard to find a ceiling on some of these dust balls. I will say Jalen Guyton plays a ton for the Chargers. Like, he's out there, and he's mostly been running wind sprints, but he's out there and he plays a ton. And so I think he's at least in play. We do have a pretty hefty ownership projection on him. 10% captain, 16% total ownership. I would say the captain is probably, I think he'll come in lower than that, but people are desperate to save salary here. Any wide receivers you want to mention that maybe are flying under the radar? I'm not seeing much.
Yeah, it's 10 points there, and Adam, not 10% projected ownership on the captain. That would be outrageous on Guyton.
Scared 1%.
So yeah, 1%.
That makes sense.
So I think, the ownership on him looks like it's fine. It doesn't look particularly, compelling one way or the other. I do like taking shots on guys that are on the field, and guys that are running wind sprints are by nature kind of running deep routes. And so if we can kind of connect on one, that's the whole thesis of the play. I don't hate it. It's like you need salary relief somewhere. So you need to kind of choose your spot on where it's going to be. I think for me, like the best guys to take those shots on would be, Guyton and then Parham. I think those would be the guys that can make big plays in the passing game and can like put a score up that actually separates a little bit. So yeah, I'm in on him, as far as this slate goes, even though I don't expect like a substantial target share or anything like that.
Yeah, Zay Jones did run 12 routes last week, ran 18 routes in week 1. He at least has a chance, but he's not even that cheap. I mean, 1,800. The tight end position is where it starts to get interesting, my friends. We have old friend of the show, Donald Parham. We have Darren Waller, who clearly, I mean, we saw ceiling games in a previous Island game where Darren Waller had 19 targets. I think the way that the Chargers play defense sets up really well for Darren Waller as well. Going to be massively owned. We have 55% overall. Still great play. I think Darren Waller, and then Cook. God, I mean, 34 years old. God, it's just ridiculous that they signed him. They spent a 3rd round pick on Trey McKitty, who can't even get on the field. Donald Parham hardly runs any routes. It's a sad state of affairs. But anyways, I think the story here is Waller. How do you handle Waller versus the field, Cody?
Yeah, we saw him get really expensive in week 2. His showdown salary got up to about $12,000. We're down to $9,200 now. So he almost like pops in that kind of value range where he's going to be so owned because he's just going to fit optimal builds so often. So yeah, not much to say on Waller. I think he's a perfectly fine captain. He's obviously my favorite captain from Las Vegas. I would much rather play him over Carr, as Drew alluded to. But yeah, you talk about Cook. I think Cook's going to kind of be kind of popular, just the way he fits builds too at 4,400. He's obviously a guy that's been on the field, a guy that's getting legitimate targets. So I think he's definitely going to force his way into quite a few lineups. We've got 27% projected ownership there. And then, Drew mentioned the PSM breaker himself, Donald Parham. Yeah, if there's a guy he's $200 more expensive than Roundtree, but has a lower median projection. So these low end guys that will force their way into lineups. I think you'll see more Roundtree than Parham. So if there's a guy that can catch 1 for 40 and a touchdown or 1 for 20 and a touchdown and actually get into an optimal lineup, it's definitely more Parham than someone like Roundtree that may get 3 or 4 carries and not force his way into lineups anyway. So yeah, if you're hunting in that low range, definitely Parham. We talked about Zay Jones. Some of these guys like that are just going to have to find their way into your lineups to make the rest of it work.
Ryan has a question. Do your projections bake in PSM for Parham? And by the way, I saw in your tweet, Cody, you wrote PSM model. Are you aware that the M in are you aware that the M in PSM stands for model?
Oh no.
Apparently you're not.
Penis size model. You got to double count it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to, by the way, we'll save this area here for Dink because I feel like a good flag plan for Dink would be like Foster Moreau or Steven Anderson.
That's what the chat's already on. The chat's
like
already on these. Yeah.
By the way, corporate just pinged me and said that if this video does not get 150 likes, we are not allowed to do flag plans. So God forbid you guys miss a Foster Moreau flag plan from Dink. We're going to need 150 likes here. We continue to GTO YouTube algorithm it up. Kicker and defense on these high scoring slates is always difficult for me, especially when they're not even that cheap. I mean, 4,000, 3,800, 3,200, 2,800. They're not even that cheap. And we have these really high scoring affairs. What do you think about playing kicker and defense tonight, Dink?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the types of game environments that you want to consider doing these a little bit more, honestly, when there's so much high end kind of production concentrated and you need to get salary relief in a way that can still get you like 10 points. Right, because it's going to need to be able to compete with some of these high-end guys. And so I'm pretty in on the kickers. I also think, like, if you're taking a big stand against Derek Carr, you probably should be considering Daniel Carlson because, honestly, like, the big stand against Derek Carr is that they're not scoring touchdowns, right? They're not scoring touchdowns. They're settling for field goals, and that's when Carlson kind of comes out. So I won't talk too much more about him because I know you've loved to flag plant kickers, Adam. So I'll leave it to you from here on Carlson versus Vizcaino.
It's a good question. Carlson versus Vizcaino. Okay, yes. Don says like inflation. Yes, like inflation. We went from 100 to 150. Rocking emojis on the likes. Yes, we're up to 149. Juan, I guarantee this guy's a Raiders fan. These Raiders fans are still in my mentions about Josh Jacobs. All right, we'll take some questions. We've got 5 minutes for questions. Then we'll do the flag plants before we get out of here. Eric says 5-1 with Raiders D as just the one. Is that burning money? Drew, is it burning money 5-1 with only the Raiders D?
It's not the way that I'm playing things, but basically with that idea, you're playing with the idea that Herbert is throwing at least one pick six, you know? So like that's kind of the whole idea behind that. I would lean towards burning money.
Spencer says that Tristan Vizcaino is actually the real Vizca. I mean,
that's big.
It's a valid point. Jordan said, is there any negative correlation for receivers in the PSM due to slowing them down or potential trippage over the dong? No, that's why we wear jock straps. Jordan, come on. Blast from the past, Joey Rivaldo, Natron Means or David Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Great Chargers for some of you guys that are a little bit older. Okay, Jake says, Eckler captain. Do I run the kicker of the opposite of my captain? I'm not sure that I don't know. What are kicker correlations, Cody? I don't know if there are any.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked into a ton of it. I think just the one that Drew mentioned is probably the biggest point. Like if you're playing a Derek Carr captain lineup, you're projecting him to throw for 4 touchdowns to like 4 different guys. So playing the kicker in that lineup is something I would not do. But yeah, I mean, you got Eckler to captain. If you wanted to play Carlson because the Raiders just flame out in the red zone, I think that's perfectly fine.
Gilo says could the thumbnails get any more egregious? They can. And I'm actually, Cody, if you don't get your ridiculous face thumbnail to the YouTube team soon, you're fired. So you better.
I've been putting Mark off for like 2 weeks. So
it's right. I can't be the only one out there looking like a total asshat. Okay. Mike Williams, a fade, a captain. Anyone agree? Yeah. Going back to our ownership, like Cody said, we don't think he's actually going to be the most owned captain, I don't believe, right, Cody?
No, I don't. He might. I mean, I don't think he'll be lower owned than Carr, but I think he'll be like the 4th or 5th most owned captain, which is crazy.
Yep, exactly. And so, yeah, I don't think that that's really taking a stand because he's cost so much more than Keenan Allen. So paying up to be contrarian, I think, is interesting with Big Mike. We get our weekly FanDuel question for you, Drew. The game that Drew thinks is unbeatable. They still want to know, Drew. It's unbeatable, but how would you attack FanDuel large field GPPs on this slate?
I think, again, like going along with the theme of my approach, if you take a big position against Carr, you've got a chance. You've got a chance to be unique, like right away. Basically the challenge with FanDuel kind of going through this is always the quarterbacks from a median projection standpoint are so much stronger. And then also their ceiling is more competitive than it is on DraftKings simply because you don't have full PPR, you don't have yardage bonuses and different things like that. So a lot of times it's hard to differentiate yourself also with the salary not changing one way to do that is get away from one of the top 3 or 4 plays on the slate that you can kind of easily fit in. And so getting away from Derek Carr would be kind of one of my approaches to try to be different tonight.
Lloyd says Waller and captain, 5-1s with
Yeah.
Waller at captain. I think that's interesting. What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. One way to do those 5-1 builds with the opposite team being the captain is someone like Waller, who just soaks up 50% of the team's targets. So definitely.
One other thing I note on those 5-1 builds, you might want to boost the Chargers D in those as well. Like it's a weird slate where like the Ds are priced down. Like it's at 3,200. This is like kicker pricing now. So these are a little bit more competitive, and it's a high total slate, so they don't project very well. And Carr's not a guy who turns the ball over a ton. But like if you're playing this to be a Chargers route, right? Like their defense has a higher floor and ceiling than some of those other players around that price tag. Yeah. So I think if you're playing 5-1s, you might want to boost the Chargers D in those projections if you're running an opto.
The best way for the defenses to generate points is by generating known passing situations, and those come when a team is winning by a lot. So you get a lot of known passing situations for Derek Carr, who starts dropping back 35, 40 times a game where Chargers know that he's throwing in a blowout. Well, I mean, you can generate a lot of pick sixes and strip sacks or fumbles that way. Is 4-2 Chargers going to be the most played construction tonight, Cody?
Yeah, I think just running optimizers before hopping on, I think it's probably leaning that way. I don't think 5-1s will still get too popular because you have a few guys in the Raiders that project pretty well, but 4-2 is definitely going to be probably the most common used lineup tonight.
Any chance you still want to play Peyton Barber, Drew? I mean, there could be aggravation here. We saw with Dalvin Cook yesterday. They brought him back. He looked like he was fine. Then he kind of aggravated. Madison ended up getting about half the work. I could see that happening here tonight with Peyton Barber. Any interest in Peyton Barber?
I could see it, but it's not the approach I take. He's like not cheap enough, honestly. Mm-hmm. That's the big challenge with both Jacobs and Barber. They're both on DraftKings. They're in like that 7K range, and it doesn't really get you a lot in terms of what the salary savings are. So I would have my eyes on another Raiders running back.
Chris wants to know if you fade both quarterbacks, are you burning money, or does it make him pop in the PSM model? 3 models there. I think we already talked about fading quarterbacks. I think playing lineups without both quarterbacks, I think is really interesting and probably fine. What do you think, Cody?
So the thing is, we just see quarterbacks pop in top 1% lineups so often, at least one of them anyway. Definitely not in the captain, but for sure in the flex. I think it was something like 94% of all top 1% lineups last year had at least one quarterback. They just score so many points on the floor that they're going to force their way into top 1% lineups so often. So definitely okay with fading both at captain, but fading both in flex is a little bit scarier.
Okay. Got a question about Josh Palmer. I really like Josh Palmer coming into the year. He only ran 5 routes last week. He's only run 26 routes all season. So you'd really be looking to catch lightning in a bottle with Josh Palmer. I mean, Guyton has just iced him, and I did not think that was coming. Nick says Eckler over 57 rushing yards. Buddy, we don't talk about overs here. Okay, this is strictly an unders club. All right, we'll do a couple more. Yeah, Parm's pregame fit was fire. I know, dude's a stud. He had diamond studded loafers for sure. All right, enough's enough. We got to, let me see how many likes we got to here. This is so pathetic. I even have to look at this. 183 likes that we got to. So yes, we will do everybody's favorite portion of the program. The flag plants. Cody, you missed last show. Why don't you take the honors of the first flag plant?
All right, I'm taking a page out of your book, taking the third highest priced player on the slate, Big Mike Williams. I've optimal captain tonight. I think that he is going to be under-owned, maybe even slightly under what we have projected, just because these 8 and 9K guys project so well. Herbert's successful at 11-2 in the captain. I think he'll be pretty popular if people are using optimizers. So yeah, Big Mike as optimal captain tonight.
Big Mike. Drew?
All right, so I have 2 choices. Do I choose chaos, or do I choose violence? And those are the 2 choices that I have in front of me. If we go with the route of violence and what could be best for the possible ETR brand, that would be me choosing Jared Cook tonight. But since I'm not in the business of destroying lives, I'm actually trying to be in the business of saving lives today. Check out my Twitter feed for Charity Water donations that I'm taking for the Welly Maker 5.0. I will be flag planting Kenyon Drake. I think Kenyon Drake is going to get over adjusted to on this news that Josh Jacobs is here. I think he's going to be sub 10% and could even be sub 5%. And I think he has the same type of profile as Hunter Renfrow in terms of a player that could benefit from the matchup specifically. And I just think the ownership gap is going to be enormous for a projection gap that's very similar. You talked about Adam, but we only dropped Kenyon Drake's projection 0.2 points on Josh Jacobs being active. We don't think the role changes very much at all. So I think the field is going to overreact to this news. And I think Kenyon Drake is like the perfect play from behind, one Raider on 5 Chargers type of teams. I think he fits really well.
Yeah. Love that. Love Drake for sure. It reminds me a little bit of Chase Edmonds, like on a smaller scale, Chase Edmonds type of play, although Chase Edmonds' base role is a little bit better. We've seen Chase Edmonds have some big games already. All right. The thing that I've been doing this a long time, 15 years. And one thing that I've known is that when you have a guy who is 6'8" and dominated minor league football and breaks the PSM, that is not something that you fade. And so especially when he's cheap and no one's on him, who's in front of Donald Parham? 34-year-old Jared Cook. And let me just see what we have here for ownership projection on Donald Parham. Yes, 0.1 captain. Optimal captain tonight will be Donald Parham, who will go
baby.
Oh my God.
4 catches, 64 yards. Take that back. 6 catches, 69 yards, and 3 touchdowns for Donald Parham today. Okay. That's going to do it.
The full 10.2.
Full 10.2. We're gonna get banned. We're gonna get banned from YouTube. Okay. All right. That's gonna do it for this Monday Night Showdown show. We will not be back on Thursday. Unfortunately, Dink is here for. You can come and say hi, buddy. Everybody want to see Sammy? Come here. Oh. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay. We won't be back on Thursday for a show because, Drew won't be back. We'll see. Maybe we'll be back, but Drew won't be back as he dives deep into NBA again. If you haven't checked out the NBA product, go ahead and check it out. All you do, you go up to here to subscribe. NBA or NBA. Gallagher's Top 150 is a good place to start. 4, Drew. 4, Cody. 4, Ben and Sam here right next to me. Good luck, everybody. Okay.